All right, joining us now in the studio is Paul Musgrave, an associate professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Paul, it's good to have you with us. So the head of the American diplomacy is right now in the Gulf trying to reassure Gulf countries about the future of the region, the future of their region, once the U.S. and Iran get to a final deal. What do you think the U.S. needs to say to its Gulf allies?
I think the first thing has to be what Secretary of State Rubio is saying publicly, which is that their interests will be respected, and that's a big change from February. In February, the Gulf countries were privately and leaking to the media that they did not want this war to take place. They were invested in mediation. They were invested in the talks that were happening before the United States and Israel launched this war. I think that the first thing that Gulf countries want to know, especially those like Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, which are most dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, that the United States will not jeopardize their physical or economic security without that. Probably the second thing they want to know is, how is the United States going to live up to this? Now, Secretary Rubio has been very persistent and very clear in laying out what he sees as the United States and its mission in making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open and that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. He's been a little bit cagier on other issues like ballistic missile programs that do directly affect the security of those of us.
That's not going to be part of a final deal.
That's not going to be part of a final deal. Now, some people have suggested that's going to be pushed back to a broader regional security architecture, but it was conventional weapons that did the most damage to the Gulf and to places like Ras Laffan.
Conventional means missiles and drones.
Missiles and drones, not nuclear, but the actual existing high explosive warheads on top of missiles and on those Shahed drones that we became so familiar with. And those are not being addressed right now. That's obviously something that the Gulf is going to want to address, both through increased and more sophisticated security spending, but also ultimately through a political solution, because Secretary Rubio is absolutely correct that what everybody wants is a political solution to these conflicts. The question is simply, how do we get from this war, from the spoiling activities of other actors, and to something that everybody around the Arabian Gulf can live with?
Let's bring in the other member of this panel, Abas Aslani, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Abbas, good to have you on the program. What is Iran's ultimate intention for the Strait of Hormuz? What is Iran's final goal for what happens in the Strait?
Well, Cyril, we have been seeing that despite the recent MOU, the two sides, meaning Iran and the United States, are flexing muscles in relation to the Strait of Hormuz. For the 60-day time frame, there will be no, let's say, fees for the new arrangements in the Strait. But Iran thinks that in the upcoming 30 days or month, it is going to somehow finalize the details with Oman, that how the new arrangements are going to be adopted from Iranian perspective after 2 months.
Abbas, allow me to jump in. You're talking about finalizing details, but my question to you is not even details, is what's the headline here? What does Iran want for the Strait of Hormuz going forward?
Well, for Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, after 60 days, the new arrangements, as it has been now implemented now, will, be subject to receiving fees for the services that are provided. But here we are seeing that Oman, under the pressure from the U.S., they want to open a southern corridor there. This is unacceptable for Iran. So from Iranian perspective, there needs to be some coordinated, routes for the transit of the vessels and tankers. And additionally, after this 60-day time frame, also the services that have been provided by Iran and Oman will need to receive fees for those services. And this is Iranian perspective. But in case that maybe there is differences or they cannot resolve it, I think that, in that scenario, we might be facing some problems which can impact the, the situation of the MOU as well as the future negotiations.
Professor Musgrave?
So I appreciate Abbas's role here in laying out the Iranian perspective. But on the other hand, from the point of view of the United States and also the GCC, this would also be unacceptable. Secretary of State Rubio has been very clear that even service fees, which is a workaround that has been used on a voluntary basis in other waterways, would contravene the innocent passage, the freedom of navigation that this depends on. I have to say that today's statement by the IRGC affecting what Oman is doing with Oman's territorial waterways seems to me to be a little bit of an escalation, a greater demand than has been articulated previously. So I think that we also have to remember that this is not just something that concerns the Strait of Hormuz. Tolling these kinds of choke points could also be applied to the Strait of Malacca. It could also be applied to the Bab al-Mandab. And these sorts of natural waterways have been treated differently for 150 years under international law. And the contagion, to use the word that Secretary Rubio used, that could spread from this region, from Hormuz to other waterways, would gravely affect international trade. So I understand the Iranian perspective, but I think that ultimately the tools that are going to be more useful for Iran are going to be sanctions relief and potential investment fund. But this is something where the Gulf and I think other stakeholders around the world, not just in Washington, are going to be very clear and very firm.
You know what, just before I come back to you in Tehran, just a word of context. I want to make sure our viewers understand. What we'll do, top right corner of your screen right now, you're seeing footage of what the Strait of Hormuz actually looks like and tanker traffic through the strait. But let's put up that live map of maritime traffic through the strait, and viewers will start to get a better understanding of why the geography is so important. This is the traffic right now going through the strait. You see the narrowest choke point? Well, the landmass north of that is Iran. That's the Iran's southern coast. The landmass, that pointy bit south of that, that's the UAE and Oman, right? And what Iran has been saying is that ships can only transit through if they hug the Iranian coast, which of course gives them more control. And what has happened over the last few days is that some ships have been going through in coordination between the UN and Oman, hugging that southern tip. So they're going by Oman, which deprives Iran of some level of control over that traffic. Abbas, thanks for your patience. Back to you. Look, whether you call them tolls or services, what you're telling us is that Iran has determined it wants to be able to get money for each ship that passes through, which has never been the case before. Is that right?
Well, Cyril, this was no secret or surprise that there was differences between the two sides on how they are going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and as a result of the discussions, they were able to embed a paragraph in the MOU which includes future administration as well as maritime services. So when future administration is somehow mentioned in the text, it's kind of, recognizes the right that, the arrangements could be somehow discussed and implemented. And with the services, normally fees come as well. But we are seeing, as I said, the two sides are flexing muscles. And Oman, was consulting and coordinating with Iran in terms of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But Muscat is being pressured in order to somehow review the discussions they had with Iran in order to open different routes in order to avoid what the arrangements Iran have been trying to adopt in the region jointly with Omanis. So that's why Iran thinks that this is based on the previous agreements that they were supposed to somehow pursue such kind of protocols. And so Tehran wants to say, if you want to pressure Oman, also from Iranian perspective, this can also backfire and Iran can react to this. So in the longer run, I think this will continue at least for a few weeks, and Iran yet insists that it will try to keep its position in relation to the Strait of Hormuz. And in case of, let's say, substantial differences between the two sides, this might, cloud the atmosphere of the ongoing negotiations as well as the destiny of the MOU.
Okay, and just as a point of clarity for our viewers, I will add this about what's actually written in the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed by both Iran and the United States. What it says is that for the next 60 days, Iran will not charge any fees or toll or any money in any shape whatsoever, but that what happens after those 60 days, that's the bit that has been left undecided by this agreement. Abas Aslani joining us from Tehran, Paul Musgrave with us in the studio. Appreciate both of you being part of the Al Jazeera NewsHour.